The autumn rain drummed against the kitchen window of our mother's house in suburban Cincinnati, Ohio, as I watched her struggle to remember where she'd placed her reading glasses. They were perched on top of her head as they had been for the past 10 minutes while she searched through every drawer in the kitchen. "Mom, they're right here," I said gently, reaching up to touch the frames that rested in her silver hair. Margaret Chuncheed kept Dad's surname even after the divorce 20 years ago, looked up at me with those familiar brown eyes that had once been so sharp, so knowing. Now they held a confusion that broke my heart a little more each day. "Oh, Sarah," she laughed, a sound that was still warm despite everything. "What would I do without you?" I smiled, though the weight of that question settled heavily in my chest. At 63, I'd been making the 2-hour drive from Columbus to Cincinnati every weekend for the past 6 months. Ever since Mom's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Unsure of how she'd gotten there, the house felt different now, just because of Mom's condition, but because of the subtle changes I'd begun to notice. The thermostat was set to 78 degrees despite the October chill. The refrigerator, once meticulously organized, contained expired milk from 3 weeks ago, sitting next to fresh groceries I couldn't remember her buying. Bills were scattered across the dining room table. Some opened, others still sealed, creating a paper landscape of financial confusion. "Have you talked to David lately?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her at the small kitchen table, where we'd shared countless meals growing up. Mom's single quotes S face brightened immediately. "Oh yes, he was just here yesterday. Or was it last week?" Her brow furrowed. "He's such a good son, always checking on me. He said he's going to help me with some paperwork soon." Something cold settled in my stomach. David lived in Denver, over 1,000 miles away. He worked in commercial real estate and had built what he constantly reminded us was a very successful business. Our conversations had become increasingly infrequent over the past year, usually limited to brief phone calls where he'd ask about Mom's condition with what seemed like clinical detachment rather than genuine concern. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, important things. House things." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "David understands all that business stuff better than I do. He says it's to protect me, to make sure everything is taken care of if something happens." The rain continued its steady rhythm against the window, and I found myself staring at the droplets racing down the glass. Something about this conversation felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly was bothering me. David had always been the pragmatic one, the brother who thought 3 steps ahead, who had opinions about investments and legal matters. That went over my head as a high school English teacher. "Mom, before you sign anything, maybe we should all talk about it together. As a family." She reached across the table and patted my hand with fingers that felt frailer than they had just months ago. "You worry too much, sweetheart." I wanted to argue, to explain that intelligence and trustworthiness weren't the same thing. But looking at her face, so trusting, so vulnerably, couldn't bring myself to plant seeds of doubt about her son, about my brother. The house settled around us with the familiar creaks and sighs of a home that had sheltered our family for over 30 years. Dad had bought it when I was in high school. A modest 2-story colonial with white shutters and a front porch where Mom still kept her collection of ceramic planters. After the divorce, she'd fought to keep it, working double shifts as a nurse to make the mortgage payments. This house wasn't just property to her, it was independence, security proof that she could make it on her own. "I should probably head back soon," I said, glancing at the clock. It was already 4 in the afternoon and I had papers to grade before Monday, but I want to make sure you're all set for the week. We went through our usual routine, checking that she had enough groceries, organizing her medications into the weekly pill dispenser, making sure all the doors and windows were locked. I'd started this ritual months ago, initially telling myself it was just being helpful. Now I recognized it for what it was: desperate attempt to create structure and safety in a situation that felt increasingly out of control. As I was gathering my things, Mom disappeared upstairs for a moment and returned with a manila folder. "David left this for me to look at," she said, holding it out. "But you know how these legal things confuse me? Maybe you could take a peek." I opened the folder with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. Inside were several documents with official-looking letterheads, dense paragraphs of legal language, and signature lines marked with yellow sticky notes. The words "power of attorney" appeared multiple times, along with references to property transfers and financial management. "Mom, this is ... This is pretty serious stuff. We should definitely all discuss this together before you sign anything." "Oh, but David explained it all to me. It's just in case something happens, so he can take care of things." She was already losing interest, distracted by something outside the window. "Look, the Pattersons got a new bird feeder." I stared at the documents, my teacher's instincts kicking in as I tried to parse the legal language. Much of it was beyond my understanding, but certain phrases jumped out. Irrevocable transfer, sole discretion, immediate effect. These didn't sound like temporary emergency measures. They sounded permanent. Mom, I think I should take these with me and have someone look at them, just to make sure we understand everything. She waved her hand again. If you think it's necessary, dear. But David was very clear about everything. The drive back to Columbus felt longer than usual, the manila folder sitting on my passenger seat like an accusation. The October sky had darkened to the color of old pewter, and the first hints of winter seemed to whisper in the wind that buffeted my car on the highway. I kept thinking about David's last visit to Mom, not yesterday. Or last week, as she'd said, but over 3 months ago for her birthday. He'd stayed for exactly 24 hours, arriving Saturday morning and leaving Sunday afternoon. I remembered because I'd driven down specifically to see him, hoping we could discuss Mom's deteriorating condition and make some plans together. Instead, he'd spent most of the visit making phone calls related to his business, checking his emails, and making comments about the house's maintenance issues and declining property values in the neighborhood. When I'd tried to bring up my concerns about Mom living alone, he'd brushed me off with platitudes about her independence and resilience. She's tougher than you think, Sarah, he'd said, not looking up from his laptop. And frankly, I think your weekly visits might be enabling her dependency. Sometimes people rise to meet expectations. At the time, I'd been hurt by his dismissiveness. Now, with the legal documents fresh in my mind, I wondered if there had been a different motive behind his words. Had he been laying groundwork for something, establishing a narrative where I was the overprotective daughter, and he was the reasonable son who understood what was best for Mom? Back in my own apartment, a small but comfortable place near the school where I taught spread, the documents across my dining room table under the bright overhead light. Legal language had never been my strong suit, but I was determined to understand what David was asking Mom to sign. The first document was straightforward enough, a standard power of attorney that would allow David to make financial and legal decisions on Mom's behalf if she became incapacitated. That seemed reasonable, even necessary, given her condition. But the second document made my blood run cold. Buried in paragraphs of dense legal terminology was language that seemed to transfer ownership of Mom's house directly to David, effective immediately upon her signature. Not in case of incapacitation, not as part of estate planning, immediately. Read the section 3 times. Sure, I must be misunderstanding something, but the words were clear. Transfer of real property located at 847 Maple Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, from Margaret Chen to David Chen, with full rights and privileges therein. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. It was nearly 9 o'clock, but I needed to talk to someone who could help me understand what I was reading. My friend Lisa worked as a paralegal at a law firm in Columbus, and while real estate wasn't her specialty, she'd know more than I did. Sarah, is everything okay? Lisa's voice was concerned. I rarely called this late. I need you to look at something, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Some legal documents. I think my brother might be trying to steal my mother's house. The words hung in the air between us, sounding absurd even as I said them. Brothers didn't steal from their own mothers. Families didn't betray each other like this. But the documents in front of me suggested otherwise, and I was beginning to understand that I might not know my brother as well as I thought I did. Can you scan them and send them to me tonight? Lisa asked, her paralegal training kicking in. I'll take a look, and we can talk in the morning. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, listening to the rain that had followed me home from Cincinnati. Somewhere in Denver, David was probably having dinner, watching television, living his successful life. And here I was, trying to piece together a puzzle that painted him as someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of taking advantage of our mother's vulnerability for his own gain. I thought about Mom, alone in that house, with her confusion and her trust, and I felt a surge of protective anger that surprised me with its intensity. Whatever David was planning, whatever those documents really meant, I wasn't going to let it happen without a fight. The rain continued through the night, washing the October world clean and preparing it for whatever battles lay ahead. The call from Lisa came at 6:30 the next morning, jolting me awake from restless dreams filled with legal documents and accusations. Sarah, we need to talk now. I was at her law office by 8, clutching a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Lisa's usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a grim professionalism that made my stomach clench with dread. Sit down, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. The documents I'd scanned were spread out before her, covered with her handwritten notes and highlighted sections. What you found. It's worse than you thought. Lisa picked up the first document, her finger tracing lines of text. This power of attorney, it's not just for emergencies. The language here gives David immediate, irrevocable control over all of your mother's assets, bank accounts, investments, property, everything. And this clause, she pointed to a section I'd missed. It specifically prevents the power of attorney from being revoked, even if your mother regains capacity. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. That can't be legal. It is, if she signs it willingly and it's properly notarized. But this second document? Lisa's voice trailed off as she picked up the property transfer papers. Sarah, this isn't estate planning. This is an immediate transfer of ownership. The moment your mother signs this, the house becomes David's. She'd have no legal claim to it whatsoever. The room seemed to tilt around me, so she could become a tenant in her own home. Worse, he could evict her immediately if he wanted to. There's nothing in here that guarantees her the right to continue living there. I stared at the documents, trying to process what Lisa was telling me. This wasn't about protecting Mom or planning for the future. This was about taking everything she owned while she was still alive to sign it away. What do I do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lisa leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. First, you need to understand that time is critical. If your mother signs these documents, undoing them becomes exponentially more difficult. We'd have to prove she wasn't competent when she signed, or that there was fraud or coercion involved. She's not competent, I said quickly. She has dementia. She gets confused, forgets things, but has she been officially diagnosed? Does she have a medical professional who can testify to her mental state? I shook my head. Mom had been resistant. 2. Seeing doctors about her memory issues, insisting she was just getting older and that everyone forgets things sometimes. I'd been planning to broach the subject of a comprehensive evaluation, but I'd been putting it off, not wanting to force the issue. Then we need to move fast, Lisa said. I'm going to give you the name of an attorney who specializes in elder law. But Sarah ... double quotes. She paused, meeting my eyes. You need to be prepared for the possibility that your brother might already be in Cincinnati. If he's serious about this, he won't wait long to get those signatures. The drive back to Cincinnati felt like the longest 2 hours of my life. I'd called in sick to work something I'd done maybe 3 times in my entire career and hit the road by 9:30. Lisa's words echoed in my head. If he's serious about this, he won't wait long. I tried calling Mom 3 times during the drive, but there was no answer. That wasn't unusual, as she often didn't hear the phone or forgot to charge the cordless handset, but today it filled me with anxiety that made my hands grip the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. When I pulled into Mom's driveway at 11:45, I immediately noticed the rental car parked on the street. A silver sedan with Colorado plates. David. I sat in my car for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart and figure out what I was going to do. Confront him directly, pretend I was just making my regular visit, try to get Mom alone so I could explain what was happening. Before I could decide, the front door opened and David stepped onto the porch. He looked exactly as I remembered, tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair that he wore in the same style he'd had since college. His clothes were expensive and perfectly fitted, the uniform of a successful businessman, but his expression, when he saw me, was something I'd never seen before, a mixture of annoyance and calculation that made him look like a stranger. Sarah, he said as I got out of my car, what are you doing here? I thought you only visited on weekends. I could ask you the same thing, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom said you were here last week, but that was obviously wrong, since you're here now. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or concern that he'd been caught in an inconsistency. I had some business in Cincinnati. Thought I'd stop by and check on her with a notary? The words were out before I could stop them, and I watched David's face close off completely. Through the front window, I could see a woman in a business suit sitting at Mom's dining room table, official-looking materials spread before her. I don't know what you think you know, David said, his voice taking on a hard edge I remembered from our childhood arguments. But Mom asked me to help her get her affairs in order. She's worried about what happens if her condition gets worse. Her condition? I stepped closer to him, anger overriding my fear. 3 months ago, you were telling me I was being overprotective, that she was fine on her own. Now suddenly you're concerned about her condition? People change, Sarah. Situations evolve. I've been thinking about what's best for Mom, and what's best for Mom is not signing away her house to you. The words hung between us in the cool October air. David's face went through several expressions, shock, anger, and finally a kind of cold calculation that scared me more than his anger had. You don't understand the complexities of the situation, he said finally. Mom can't continue living here indefinitely. The house is too big, too expensive to maintain. She needs to be in a facility where she can get proper care, and you need to own her house to make that happen. The proceeds from the sale would pay for her care. I'd be managing her assets responsibly by putting them in your name. David glanced back toward the house, where I could see Mom moving around in the kitchen, probably making tea for her guests. The normalcy of her hospitality, her trust made my chest tight with rage. Look, David said, lowering his voice. This is happening whether you interfere or not. Mom trusts me to handle these things. She's already agreed to everything, because she doesn't understand what she's agreeing to. That's your opinion. The notary is here to verify that she's signing of her own free will. He straightened his tie, a gesture I recognized from childhood, something he did when he was about to do something he knew was wrong but had justified to himself. I suggest you either come inside and be supportive or leave and let us handle this family business. Family business. The phrase made me want to laugh or scream or both. This isn't family business, David. This is theft. His face hardened completely. Careful, Sarah. Accusations like that could be considered slander. The threat was clear, and for a moment I felt the old childhood dynamic reasserting itself. David, 3 years older, always smarter, always in control, and me, the little sister, who never quite understood how the world really worked. But I wasn't a child anymore, and Mom needed someone to protect her. I'm going inside, I said, and I'm going to make sure Mom understands exactly what those papers say before she signs anything. David stepped in front of me, blocking the path. To the front door? I don't think that's a good idea. You'll just confuse her. Get out of my way, David. We stared at each other for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before: desperation. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about something deeper, something that had driven him to travel across the country to manipulate our vulnerable mother. Why? I asked quietly. Why are you doing this? For just a second, his mask slipped, and I saw something raw and frightened underneath. You don't know what it's like, he said. You don't know what I'm dealing with. Before I could ask what he meant, he straightened his shoulders and the businessman's facade snapped back into place. This is for Mom's own good, whether you can see it or not. He moved aside, but his body language made it clear this was a tactical retreat, not a surrender. I walked past him toward the front door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Inside, Mom was indeed making tea, humming softly to herself as she arranged cookies on a plate. The notary, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an official seal, looked up as I entered. Oh good, Mom said brightly. Sarah, this is Mrs. Patterson. She's here to help with some paperwork. Actually, Mom, I'm Mrs. Patterson from next door. This is Mrs. Rodriguez, the notary. I saw the confusion flicker across Mom's face as she tried to reconcile the two Mrs. Pattersons in her mind. It was exactly the kind of small confusion that David would exploit, that made her vulnerable to trusting anyone who seemed official and helpful. Mrs. Rodriguez, I said, turning to the notary. I'm Margaret's daughter. Before my mother signs anything, I'd like her to have legal representation present. The notary looked between me and David, who had followed me inside. That's certainly Mrs. Chen's right, she said carefully. But she's indicated that she understands the documents and wants to proceed. Mom, I said, sitting down beside her. At the table, do you remember what we talked about yesterday? About discussing any paperwork as a family before you sign it? Mom's brow furrowed and she looked around the table at the three of us as if trying to remember where she was and why. We were all there. David said it was important. To protect the house. Protect it. How, Mom? Sarah. David's voice was sharp. Don't interrogate her. But I kept my eyes on Mom's face. What did David tell you would happen to the house, Mom? He said, ... She paused, looking confused. He said if something happened to me, there might be problems with taxes or I don't remember exactly. But he said this way. Everything would be taken care of. I picked up the property transfer document. Mom, this paper says that if you sign it, the house becomes David's house, not yours anymore. Do you understand that? The confusion in Mom's eyes deepened. But David said, he said it was just to help. That's enough, David said, standing up. Mrs. Rodriguez, I think we should proceed. My mother is getting agitated and I don't want this to become more stressful for her than it needs to be. Actually, Mrs. Rodriguez said, closing her official folder, I think Mrs. Chen might benefit from having some time to think about this. These are significant documents, and it's clear there are family disagreements about the best course of action. There are no disagreements, David said firmly. My sister is overreacting to something she doesn't understand. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up, her demeanor professional but firm. I'm not comfortable proceeding today. Mrs. Chen, you have my card? If you decide you want to move forward, you can call me and we can schedule another appointment. I watched David's face cycle through emotions: anger, frustration, and again that flash of something like panic. He was used to controlling situations, to having his expertise and authority carry the day, but Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't his employee, or his client, and she'd clearly seen enough questionable situations to recognize one. After the notary left, the three of us sat in Mom's living room in tense silence. Mom kept looking between David and me as if she could sense the conflict but couldn't quite grasp what it was about. "I think I'd like to take a nap," she said finally, and I realized how exhausting this must have been for her. The confusion, the pressure, the sense that something important was happening that she couldn't quite understand after she went upstairs. David and I faced each other across the coffee table, where we'd played board games as children, where we'd done homework together, where we'd sat with Mom after Dad moved out, and she'd tried to explain that sometimes families change, but love doesn't. "You have no idea what you've just done," David said quietly. "I protected our mother. You've complicated a situation that was already difficult enough." He rubbed his temples, looking suddenly older than his 55 years. "Sarah, there are things you don't know. Financial pressures, legal issues. This house is going to become a liability for her, and she can't handle the responsibility anymore. Then we help her handle it. We don't steal it from her." "I'm not stealing anything." The words came out louder than he'd intended, and he glanced toward the stairs, making sure he hadn't woken Mom. "I'm trying to protect her assets to make sure she has resources for her care. Do you have any idea what memory care facilities cost? What happens when her condition gets worse and she needs round-the-clock care?" I stared at him, trying to understand. "So, this is about money. Your money." "It's about her money, Sarah, about making sure she has enough to last for whatever comes next. By putting her house in your name. By managing her assets responsibly." "Yes." The logic was so twisted, so self-serving, that I almost laughed. "David, if you sell Mom's house and put the money toward her care, that's one thing. But these documents don't say anything about using the proceeds for her benefit. They just transfer ownership to you." Something shifted in David's expression, a hardening that made him look like a stranger. "You always did think the worst of me. I never had reason to think anything about you one way or another. We're family. We're family," he said, standing up. "Now we're opponents, apparently." He gathered up the unsigned documents, his movements sharp with anger. "This isn't over, Sarah. Mom needs help whether you want to admit it or not, and I'm not going to stand by and watch her deteriorate just because you can't face reality, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you take advantage of her." David paused at the front door, his hand on the knob. "You think you're protecting her, but you're not. You're just making everything harder for everyone." After he left, I sat in Mom's quiet living room, listening to the old house settle around me. Upstairs, I could hear her moving around, probably getting ready for her nap. The normalcy of it, the everyday sounds of a life being lived, made what had just happened feel surreal. But the documents in David's briefcase were real. His desperation was real. And somewhere in Denver, he was probably already planning his next move. I pulled out my phone and called Lisa. "It's worse than we thought," I said when she answered. "He's here now, and he almost got her to sign." "Lisa, I think I'm in over my head." "No," she said firmly. "You're exactly where you need to be. You stopped him today, which means we have time to build a real defense. But Sarah, you need to understand this is just the beginning. If your brother is as determined as he seems, he's not going to give up easily." I looked around Mom's living room, at the family photos on the mantle, at the Afghan she'd knitted draped over the back of Dad's old recliner, at all the small details that made this place home for her. David was right about one thing: Mom couldn't handle the complexities of legal and financial management anymore. But that didn't mean she had to lose everything she'd worked for. "What do we do next?" I asked. "First, we make sure your mother gets a proper medical evaluation. If she's declared incompetent, it protects her from signing anything else. Then we get her a real power of attorney, one that protects her interests, not your brother's. And if David comes back," Lisa's voice was grim, "then we hope we move faster than he does." The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November. 6 weeks after I'd stopped David from getting Mom's signature, I found it tucked between a grocery store circular and a fundraising letter from Mom's church. The official legal language stark against the cheerful autumn advertisements. Notice to quit and deliver. Up, possession of Premisesto, Margaret Chen, and all other occupants of the premises located at 847 Maple Street, Cincinnati, Ohio. You are hereby notified that your tenancy of the above described premises is hereby terminated. You are required to quit and deliver up possession of said premises to the undersigned within 30 days. My hands were shaking as I read the document. According to the notice, the house now belonged to David Chen, and Margaret Chen was considered a tenant whose lease had been terminated for non-payment of rent. "Mom," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. Can you come here for a minute? She appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing the blue cardigan I'd bought her last Christmas and looking confused by my tone. What's wrong, sweetheart? I held up the eviction notice. Did David come back? Did you sign any papers recently? The confusion in her eyes deepened. Papers? Maybe. David said something about helping with the house. He brought that nice lady again, the one with the official stamp. My heart sank. Despite everything, despite our confrontation, despite the notary's reluctance, despite my vigilance, David had found a way to get what he wanted. When was this, Mom? Yesterday? Or when did the leaves change colors? She gestured vaguely toward the window, where the maple tree in her front yard stood bare against the gray November sky. Time moves so strangely now. I pulled out my phone and called Lisa immediately. He did it, I said when she answered. Somehow, he got her to sign. There's an eviction notice. Slow down, Lisa said. Tell me exactly what the notice says. I read the document word for word, my voice getting steadier as I focused on the technical details. Lisa was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Sarah, this is actually good news. Good news. They're trying to evict my mother from her own. Think about it. If David had legitimate ownership through a properly executed power of attorney and property transfer, why would he need to evict her? He could just ask her to leave, or arrange for her care elsewhere. The fact that he's using formal eviction proceedings suggests there's something wrong with his claim. Lisa's words sparked a small flame of hope in my chest. What do you mean? I mean, we have grounds to fight this. And more importantly, we have evidence that your brother obtained those signatures through questionable means. No legitimate power of attorney includes provisions for immediately evicting the grantor from their own home. So what do we do? First, we file a response to the eviction notice. Then we challenge the validity of whatever documents David used to establish ownership in Sarah. Lisa's voice became serious. It's time to bring in that elder law attorney I mentioned. This is beyond what I can help you with. Eleanor Law office was located in a converted Victorian house in downtown Cincinnati. Its burgundy carpet and dark wood paneling conveying both tradition and authority. At 60-something with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked like the kind of lawyer who'd seen every trick in the book and had responses for all of them. I've reviewed the documents you provided, she said, gesturing to a thick folder on her desk. And I have to say, this is one of the more brazen cases of elder financial abuse I've encountered. I sat up straighter. Financial abuse. That's the legal term for what your brother has done, taking advantage of an elderly person's diminished capacity to gain control of their assets. Eleanor opened the folder and pulled out several papers. These documents he had your mother sign are creative. I'll give him that. But they're also potentially fraudulent. Potentially. The power of attorney document itself isn't unusual, though some of the language is more broad than I'd typically recommend, but this property transfer? She held up the second document. This is where things get interesting. The language here suggests that your mother transferred ownership of her house to your brother in exchange for his promise to care for her. But there's no consideration listed, no money changing hands. No formal care agreement, nothing to indicate why she would give away her most valuable asset. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. More importantly, the timing is suspicious. These documents are dated just 2 days apart, which suggests they were both signed during the same visit. That supports our argument that your mother was pressured or coerced into signing. What about the eviction notice? That's actually the most damaging evidence against your brother. By filing for eviction, he's essentially admitting that your mother didn't willingly give up possession of the house. If she had truly agreed to transfer ownership and move out, there would be no need for legal proceedings. I felt a surge of hope mixed with anger, so we can fight this. We can and we will. But I need to be honest with you about what we're facing. Eleanor's expression became grave. Your brother has significant resources, financial and legal. Fighting this could take months, possibly years. It will be expensive, emotionally draining, and there are no guarantees. What happens to Mom while all this is going out? She stays in the house. Filing a response to the eviction gives us time, and challenging the validity of the property transfer creates additional delays. But, Sarah, double quotes, Eleanor met my eyes. We need to address your mother's medical condition. If she's declared incompetent, it strengthens our case immensely. But it also means facing some difficult realities about her care. I nodded, though the thought of forcing Mom through medical evaluations and competency hearings made my chest tight, whatever it takes. And increasingly hostile phone calls from David. Dr. Patricia Williams, the geriatrician Eleanor recommended, was thorough and compassionate as she evaluated Mom's cognitive function. The results were both heartbreaking and legally useful. moderate stage dementia with significant impairment in judgment and decision-making capacity. I'm sorry, Dr. Williams said as she delivered the diagnosis. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but in a strange way, it was exactly what I needed to hear. The medical evidence meant that any documents Mom had signed recently could be challenged on the grounds that she lacked the capacity to understand what she was agreeing to. David's reaction to the competency evaluation was swift and predictable. You had our mother declared mentally incompetent. His voice over the phone was ice cold. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for her? She has dementia, David. Getting her proper medical care isn't humiliating, it's necessary. What's necessary is accepting reality. Mom can't live independently anymore, and fighting this legal process isn't going to change that. Fighting this legal process is about making sure she's protected and cared for properly, not about making sure you get her house. There was a long pause. When David spoke again, his voice had taken on a different quality, tired, almost defeated. Sarah, there are things you don't understand about my situation. Financial pressures that make this house sale necessary. The first time since this whole nightmare began, I heard something human in my brother's voice. Something vulnerable. What kind of financial pressures? Another pause. Business setbacks. Some investments that didn't pan out. I'm in a position where Mom's house could solve some significant problems. The admission hung between us, and I felt a complex mix of emotions, anger, disappointment, and surprising pity. So this is about your money problems, not Mom's care. It's about both, he said, but the defensiveness was gone from his voice. I thought I could handle both problems at once. Help Mom and help myself by stealing her house. The silence stretched. So long I thought he might have hung up. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I never thought of it as stealing. What would you call it? Practical? Necessary? I convinced myself it was the smart thing to do for everyone involved. I closed my eyes, feeling suddenly exhausted. This was my brother, the same person who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me with my math homework, who'd stood beside me at Dad's funeral 5 years ago. How had we gotten to this place? David, if you're in financial trouble, there are other ways to handle it. Ways that don't involve taking advantage of Mom. Are there? His laugh was bitter at 55. When you've leveraged everything and borrowed against everything else, when your business partners are threatening lawsuits and your wife is talking about divorce because she's tired of the stress. The picture he was painting made me feel sick. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Because I'm supposed to be the successful one, remember? The brother who has it all figured out? How do you tell your little sister that everything you've built is falling apart? Despite everything, despite the forged documents and the eviction notice and the weeks of legal battles, I felt a stab of sympathy for him. We're family, David. We could have figured something out together, could we? When was the last time we had a real conversation about anything that mattered? When was the last time we saw each other outside of family emergencies? He was right, and that hurt almost as much as his betrayal. We'd drifted apart over the years, our relationship reduced to birthday cards and holiday phone calls. I knew the broad strokes of his life, the successful business, the house in Denver, the wife who worked in marketing, but I didn't know him? Not really. It doesn't matter now, he said, his voice regaining some of its earlier hardness. What's done is done. Mom signed the papers willingly, and the house is legally mine. Mom doesn't have the capacity to sign legal documents, and you know it. That's your opinion. My mother was perfectly coherent when she asked me to help her with her affairs. And just like that, the moment of vulnerability was gone, replaced by the defensive businessman I'd been fighting for weeks, but now I knew what was driving him, and somehow that made it worse. This wasn't just greed or callousness, it was desperation, which made him even more dangerous. After we hung up, I sat in Mom's kitchen, watching her struggle to remember how to use the coffee maker she'd operated thousands of times before. The routine that had once been automatic now required concentration and multiple attempts, each failure adding to her frustration. I used to be able to do this, she said, her voice small and lost. I know, Mom. Here, let me help you. As I guided her through the process, I thought about David's question. When was the last time we'd had a real conversation? The answer was probably Dad's funeral. When grief had stripped away our adult pretenses and left us both raw and vulnerable, we'd held each other and cried and promised to stay in touch better. But life had intervened, as it always did, and the promise had faded into good intentions and missed opportunities. Now those missed opportunities had led us here, to a legal battle that would tear our family apart, regardless of who won. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for December 15th, just 10 days before Christmas. Eleanor had filed a comprehensive challenge to the property transfer. arguing that Mom lacked capacity when she signed the documents and that David had used undue influence to obtain her signature. We also requested an injunction to prevent any sale of the property while the case was pending. The good news, Eleanor explained as we sat in her office reviewing our strategy, is that the burden of proof is on your brother to demonstrate that the transfer was legitimate. The bad news is that he has competent legal representation and significant resources. David's lawyer, according to the court filings, was a partner at a prestigious Denver firm specializing in real estate and contract law. The kind of attorney you hired when winning was more important than being right. What are our chances? I asked. Eleanor considered the question carefully. If this case were only about the legal documents, I'd say we have a strong chance of prevailing. But family law is complicated, and judges are reluctant to make decisions that could leave elderly people without proper care. Your brother's attorney will argue that the property transfer was part of a comprehensive care plan, and that reversing it would leave your mother in a vulnerable position. But that's not true. I'm perfectly capable of caring for her. Are you? Can you provide round-the-clock supervision? Medical care? Can you handle her financial affairs while working full-time? Eleanor's questions weren't accusations. She was preparing me for what David's lawyer would argue. These are the practical realities the court will consider. I knew she was right. My weekend visits and phone calls weren't adequate care for someone with Mom's condition, but moving her to Denver, away from everything familiar, seemed cruel. And putting her in a facility, I wasn't ready to consider that option. There is another possibility, Eleanor said carefully. If your mother were placed under a formal guardianship, it would void any documents she signed while lacking capacity. You could petition to become her guardian, which would give you legal authority to manage her affairs and protect her assets. The word guardianship felt heavy with implications. It meant acknowledging that Mom could no longer make decisions for herself, that she needed someone else to speak for her in all legal and financial matters. It meant becoming responsible for another person's life in ways I'd never imagined. I need to think about it, I said. That evening, I tried to explain the situation to Mom as gently as possible. We were sitting in her living room, the Christmas tree I'd helped her put up twinkling in the corner, creating an illusion of normalcy that made the conversation even more surreal. There might be some legal complications with the house, I began. David and I disagree about what's best for you. Mom's face scrunched with confusion. David, is he coming for Christmas? I don't think so, Mom. We're having some family difficulties right now. Oh, she seemed to consider this for a moment, then brightened. Well, families always work things out, don't they? Love finds a way. Her optimism, so at odds with the reality of our situation, made my chest tight with emotion. In her mind, we were still the family. We'd once been the family that had gathered around this same Christmas tree year after year, arguing about whose turn it was to put the star on top, eating too many of Mom's sugar cookies, playing board games until midnight on Christmas Eve. Mom, if something happened and you couldn't make decisions for yourself anymore, who would you want to help you? Who would you trust to take care of things? She looked at me with sudden clarity, as if the fog in her mind had lifted momentarily. You, she said without hesitation. I'd want you to take care of me, Sarah. You're the one who's always been here. The next morning, I called Eleanor and told her I wanted to file for guardianship. The court hearing on December 15th was held in a sterile conference room that smelled of industrial carpet and anxiety. Mom sat beside me, wearing her best dress and looking confused by the formal proceedings. David sat across the room with his attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit who looked like she ate opposing counsel for breakfast. Judge Morrison was a man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He'd clearly dealt with family disputes like this before, and his questions were precise and probing. Mr. Chen, he said, addressing David's attorney, your client claims that Mrs. Chen willingly transferred ownership of her property to her son as part of a care arrangement. Can you provide evidence of this arrangement? The attorney produced a folder thick with documents. Your Honor, my client has been concerned about his mother's declining condition for months. The property transfer was accompanied by a comprehensive care plan that would ensure Mrs. Chen receives appropriate medical attention and housing. Where is this care plan? It's still being finalized. Your Honor, the transfer was the first step in a multi-phase approach to ensuring Mrs. Chen's welfare. I saw Eleanor make a note on her legal pad. The lack of a concrete care plan was a weakness in David's case, and we both knew it. Mrs. Hartwell, the judge, turned to Eleanor. Your client is seeking both to void the property transfer and to establish guardianship over Mrs. Chen. Those are significant requests. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Chen lacks the capacity to make complex legal and financial decisions. As evidenced by the medical evaluation in Exhibit C, The property transfer was obtained through undue influence, while she was in a vulnerable state. Judge Morrison looked directly at Mom, his expression gentle. Mrs. Chen, do you understand why we're here today? Mom looked around the room, her confusion evident. There seems to be some disagreement about my house, she said finally. But I don't understand why we need all these people to sort it out. Can't David and Sarah just talk to each other? The simplicity of her question, the assumption that family problems could be solved through communication and goodwill highlighted how far we'd all strayed from the people we used to be. Mrs. Chen, the judge continued, do you remember signing papers that would give your house to David? Mom's brow furrowed. David said it was to help, to make sure everything was taken care of. But I thought, I thought I would still live here. Judge Morrison made several notes before addressing the room again. I'm going to order a temporary injunction preventing any sale or transfer of the property while we sort this out. I'm also ordering a comprehensive psychological evaluation to determine Mrs. Chen's current mental capacity. We'll reconvene in 30 days to review the results and make a final determination. As we left the courthouse, David caught up with me in the parking lot. You have no idea what you're doing, he said, his face flushed with anger and frustration. Fighting this isn't going to change the fact that Mom needs more care than you can provide? Maybe not, I replied, but it's going to make sure that whatever care she gets, it's in her best interest, not yours. My interests and her interests aren't mutually exclusive, aren't they? Because from where I stand, it looks like your interests involve owning her house while she pays rent to live in a nursing facility? David's face went pale. That's not. I would never put her in a facility. Then what was your plan, David? Really? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the gray December sky. I thought I could bring her to Denver, find her a nice place near us where she could get proper care but still have some independence. Did you ask her if that's what she wanted? She's not capable of making that kind of decision anymore. She's not capable of making legal decisions, but she's still capable of having preferences, of wanting to stay in the place she's called home for 30 years. David looked at me with something that might have been regret. I'm trying to do the right thing here, Sarah, for both of us. No, I said. You're trying to solve your problems by creating bigger ones for Mom, and that's not the same thing. Asterisk, the psychological evaluation took place over 3 sessions in January, conducted by Dr. Amanda Foster, a specialist in geriatric cognitive assessment. I watched Mom struggle through memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and questions about her daily life, each session making it clearer that the sharp, independent woman who had raised me was slipping away. Mrs. Chen shows significant impairment in executive function, short-term memory, and judgment, Dr. Foster explained during our follow-up meeting. She's in the moderate stage of dementia, which means she can still handle some basic daily activities but requires supervision for complex decisions. The official diagnosis felt like a door closing on the last remnants of my mother's independence, but it also provided the legal foundation we needed to protect her. The good news, Eleanor said when I brought her the evaluation results, is that this medical evidence makes it virtually impossible for your brother to argue that your mother had capacity when she signed those documents. The bad news is that we need to address the elephant in the room. What happens to your mother's care? Moving forward, I'd been dreading this conversation. What do you mean? I mean, the court isn't just going to void the property transfer and walk away. They're going to want assurance that Mrs. Chen will receive appropriate care. Your brother's lawyer will argue that regardless of how he obtained the house, his basic premise was correct. Your mother needs more supervision than weekend visits can provide. The weight of that reality had been settling on my shoulders for weeks. Mom's condition was worsening noticeably, even since November. She'd started leaving the stove on, forgetting to lock doors, and becoming confused about basic routines, like taking her medications. Mrs. Patterson next door had called twice to report finding Mom wandering in the backyard in her nightgown. I've been thinking about taking early retirement, I said. Moving to Cincinnati to care for her full-time. Eleanor studied me carefully. That's a significant life change. Are you prepared for what that entails? Full-time caregiving for someone with dementia is physically and emotionally exhausting. It's a 24-hour responsibility that will only get more demanding as her condition progresses. I knew she was right, but the alternative, putting Mom in a facility, felt like giving up. It's what she would do for me. Maybe, but it's also important to consider what she would want for you. Would your mother want you to sacrifice your career, your financial security, and your own well-being to care for her? The question hit me harder than I expected. Mom had always been fiercely independent, proud of her ability to handle whatever life threw at her. Would she really want me to give up everything to become her caretaker? The final hearing was scheduled for February 28th. By then, winter had settled over Cincinnati with a vengeance. covering the city in dirty snow and the kind of cold that made bones ache. Mom seemed smaller somehow, more fragile, as if the legal battle had drained something essential from her. David flew in the night before, and to my surprise, he called and asked if we could meet for coffee. We chose a neutral location, a small cafe downtown, away from Mom's house and the emotional weight it carried for both of us. David looked tired, older than his 55 years, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "How is she?" he asked after we'd ordered our drinks. "You could come see for yourself. I don't think that would be helpful right now. For her or for us." I wanted to argue, but he was probably right. The legal battle had created a chasm between us that simple family visits couldn't bridge. "She asks about you sometimes," I said. "She doesn't understand why you're not coming for Christmas or her birthday, or just because." David's face tightened with what looked like pain. "This isn't what I wanted, Sarah. None of this is what I wanted." "Then why are we here?" He was quiet for a long time, staring out the cafe window at the snow-covered street. "I panicked," he said finally. "My business was falling apart. My marriage was falling apart, and I saw what I thought was a solution. I convinced myself I was being practical, that I was solving problems for both Mom and me. By stealing her house, by managing her assets responsibly before she lost the capacity to do it herself." His voice was defensive, but without the sharp edge it had carried for months. "I told myself that someone needed to make the hard decisions. And you weren't willing to face reality." "What reality?" "That Mom can't live independently anymore. That she needs professional care. That keeping her in that house is dangerous and unsustainable." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. He was right about Mom's condition, even if his solution had been wrong. "So what do we do now?" I asked. David looked surprised by the question. I assumed you'd made it clear that there was no we anymore. Maybe there doesn't have to be. But tomorrow, a judge is going to make decisions about Mom's future. Wouldn't it be better if we could present a unified plan instead of fighting each other?" For the first time in months, I saw something hopeful flicker in David's eyes. "What kind of plan?" We talked for 2 hours, slowly working through the practical realities of Mom's care. David was right that she couldn't continue living alone in the house, and I was right that any care plan needed to prioritize her well-being over financial convenience. Gradually, tentatively, we began to construct a solution that neither of us had considered before. The next morning, Eleanor was surprised when I called to request a last-minute modification to our court strategy. "You want to do what?" she asked. "I want to propose a compromise. David withdraws his claim to the house. I become Mom's legal guardian, and we work together to find appropriate care for her." "Sarah, compromise is fine in principle, but you need to be careful. Your brother has spent months trying to manipulate this situation to his advantage. What makes you think he's changed?" It was a fair question, and I wasn't entirely sure of the answer, because I think we both realized that fighting each other isn't helping Mom, and because, maybe, despite everything, we're still family. Eleanor was skeptical, but she agreed to approach David's attorney about a potential settlement, to everyone's surprise, including mine. David was receptive to the idea. Judge Morrison looked puzzled when both attorneys approached the bench that afternoon to request a recess for settlement negotiations. "Are you telling me that after months of litigation you've worked out an agreement in the hallway?" he asked. "We believe so, Your Honor," Eleanor replied. "With the court's permission, we'd like to present a joint custody and care plan for Mrs. Chen." The agreement we'd hammered out was complex but fair. David would relinquish any claim to Mom's house, and the fraudulent property transfer would be voided. I would become Mom's legal guardian, with authority over her medical and financial decisions. The house would be sold, but the proceeds would go into a trust specifically for Mom's care. With both David and me serving as trustees, most importantly, we'd found Willowbrook Manor, a memory care facility in Cincinnati that specialized in dementia care. It wasn't cheap, but the sale of the house combined with Mom's savings would cover the costs for several years. And it was only 20 minutes from my apartment, close enough for daily visits. "Mrs. Chen," Judge Morrison said, addressing Mom directly, "your children have worked out a plan for your care. Do you understand what we've discussed?" Mom looked around the courtroom, her confusion evident, but her trust absolute. "Sarah will take care of me?" she asked. "Yes, Mom, I'll take care of you. And David." I looked across the room at my brother, who was wiping his eyes with a tissue. "David will help too." "Good," Mom said with a smile that broke my heart. Families should stick together. The transition to Willowbrook Manor took 6 weeks. David flew back from Denver to help with the move, and for those 6 weeks, we worked together like we hadn't in years. We sorted through 30 years of accumulated belongings, deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to store. We interviewed care coordinators, toured facilities, and made the thousand small decisions that come with uprooting a life. It wasn't easy. Mom was confused and sometimes resistant to the idea of leaving her house. She didn't understand why she couldn't just stay where she was, why everything had to change. But, slowly, gradually, we helped her accept that this was what needed to happen. "I don't like it," she said on moving day. Standing in her empty living room for the last time. "This was my home, I know, Mom," I said, taking her hand. "But home isn't just a place, it's being with people who love you." David carried the last box to the car, then stood in the doorway looking back at the house where we'd grown up. "Remember when we used to have those epic Monopoly games in the living room?" he said. "You always insisted on being the shoe. You always cheated with the bank. I was teaching you about capitalism. Despite everything, I laughed. Is that what you were doing?" Among other things, his expression grew serious. "Sarah, I'm sorry for all of it. I lost sight of what was important, and I almost destroyed our family because of it." "We both made mistakes," I said, "but maybe we can do better going forward." Willowbrook Manor turned out to be a good choice. The staff was patient and caring. The facility was clean and well maintained, and Mom adjusted better than I'd expected. She made friends with her roommate, a former teacher named Betty who shared her love of crossword puzzles and old movies. She participated in art therapy and music programs, and on good days, she seemed almost like herself again. I visited every day after work, sometimes bringing David via video call when he was back in Denver. We'd established a routine I handled, the day-to-day care decisions, while David managed the financial aspects of the trust and coordinated with Mom's doctors for major medical decisions. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. 3 months after Mom moved to Willowbrook, David made an unexpected announcement during one of our weekly check-in calls. "I'm moving back to Cincinnati," he said. "What? Why?" "My business is essentially finished anyway, and Rebecca and I are getting divorced. There's nothing keeping me in Denver, and I want to be closer to Mom, to both of you." The idea of David living in the same city again was both appealing and terrifying. We'd managed to rebuild a working relationship, but could we handle being family again in a more daily sense? "Where would you live? What would you do for work?" "I'm looking at a condo downtown, and I've got some leads on consulting work. Nothing as grand as what I had before, but maybe that's not a bad thing." "David, you don't have to rebuild your whole life around Mom's care." I know you can handle it," he interrupted. "You've been handling everything, but I want to help. I want to be the brother I should have been all along." 6 months later, David was living 15 minutes away and visiting Mom 3 times a week. We'd settled into a new normal that none of us could have imagined a year earlier. Mom's condition continued to decline gradually, but she was safe, cared for, and surrounded by people who loved her. One evening in late autumn, as I was leaving Willowbrook after dinner with Mom, I ran into David in the parking lot. "How did she seem tonight?" he asked. "Pretty good." She remembered that today was her wedding anniversary, which surprised me. She told Betty all about the dress she wore when she married Dad. David smiled. She always loved that story. The way she tells it, Dad was so nervous he dropped the ring during the ceremony. "Twice," I added, and we both laughed. We stood in the parking lot for a moment, watching the first few leaves fall from the maple trees that lined the facility's driveway. The air had that crisp bite of approaching winter, but it felt different. From the harsh cold of the previous year's legal battle. "Do you think she forgives us?" David asked quietly. "For everything that happened?" I considered the question. "I think she doesn't really remember most of it. But I also think that even if she did, she'd forgive us. That's who she is. She always said family was the most important thing." She was right. David was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I know I can't undo what I did. The way I handled everything, the way I treated Mom, the way I treated you. I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough. It's a start," I said. "And showing up every week, helping with her care, being present, that matters too. I want to do better, to be better. Then just keep doing what you're doing, one day at a time." As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. A year ago, I'd discovered documents that revealed my brother's betrayal and set in motion a legal battle that could have destroyed our family permanently. Instead, somehow it had forced us to confront hard truths about Mom's condition, about our own relationship, and about what really mattered. Mom was safe now, cared for by professionals who understood her needs. David and I had rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of shared responsibility and mutual respect. It wasn't the family we'd been before that was impossible now, but it was a family that worked, that showed up for each other, that honored the woman who had taught us that love finds a way. The house on Maple Street had been sold to a young couple with 2 small children. Sometimes I drove by and saw toys in the yard, bikes on the sidewalk. The kind of life Mom would have been happy to see continuing in the place she'd called home for so long. But home, as I'd told Mom on moving day, wasn't just a place. It was being with people who loved you, who showed up when things got difficult, who chose family even when family chose poorly. We'd found our way back to each other. David and I, through the long winter of legal battles and the slow spring of rebuilding, trust. And Mom, in her quiet moments of clarity, seemed to understand that her children had remembered what she'd always tried to teach us. That family isn't perfect, but it's permanent, and love really does find a way. The story could have ended differently. David could have succeeded in his plan, leaving Mom vulnerable and our family shattered. I could have given up when the legal battle seemed too complicated, too expensive, too emotionally draining. We all could have chosen the easier path of walking away from the mess we'd created. Instead, we chose the harder path of staying, of fighting for what was right, of rebuilding what had been broken. It wasn't a perfect ending. Mom's condition would continue to worsen. Money would remain tight, and the grief of watching someone you loved disappear gradually would never get easier. But it was an ending that honored the woman who had raised us to believe that family meant something, that commitment mattered, and that sometimes the most important battles are the ones fought not for victory, but for love. In the end, that's what this had all been about. Not houses or money or legal documents, but love. The complicated, imperfect, sometimes painful love that binds families together and sees them through the darkest times. Mom had been right all along. Love does find a way. Sometimes it just takes longer and costs more and requires more courage than anyone expects, but it finds a way.